The Draconian Empire was massive beyond imagination. It controlled 1,000 star systems, each one bowing to the power of scaled warriors who could fly through space itself. These dragons were not like the creatures from old Earth legends. They were real, terrifying, and unstoppable. Their wings were so powerful they could break apart asteroids with a single strike. Their claws could tear through starship hulls like paper. Emperor Draxon the Eternal sat on his throne in the grand crystalline palace on Drakmor, the Empire's home world. The palace itself was a wonder, built from materials that sparkled like diamonds but were harder than any metal known to science. Every species that the Draconians had conquered over the centuries came here to pay tribute. Insectoids, energy beings, silicon-based life forms, and recently humans from the planet Terra. All of them bent the knee before draconic supremacy. But empires, no matter how powerful, always have secrets. And the Draconian Empire had a secret so dangerous it was kept locked away in the highest tower of the palace, far from public view. Crown Prince Kyler was that secret. He was Emperor Draxon's only son, the heir to 1,000 star systems, the future ruler of the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. But Prince Kyler had never taken a single step in his entire life. His legs had been twisted since birth, the bones formed wrong, the muscles weak and unable to support his weight. Even worse for a Draconian, his wings hung limp and useless against his back. While other young dragons learned to soar through the skies before they could even speak, Kyler remained grounded, trapped in his own body. For 20 long years the prince had lived in that tower. It had become his entire world. The Emperor had brought in the finest medical specialists from every corner of the Empire. Draconian doctors who understood their biology better than anyone. Alien physicians with technology that could heal injuries thought impossible. Genetic engineers who tried to rewrite his very DNA. Cybernetic experts who wanted to replace his limbs with mechanical parts. All of them failed. Some said his condition was genetic, a rare mutation that appeared once in a million births. Others whispered it was a curse, punishment from ancient gods the Draconians no longer believed in. A few brave souls suggested it might be the universe's way of showing that even the mighty could be humbled. But none of that mattered to Kyler. He just wanted to walk, to fly, to be normal. Draconian culture was harsh and unforgiving. Strength was everything. Weakness was not just looked down upon, it was considered a form of corruption, something that needed to be removed before it could spread. If the Empire knew their future emperor couldn't even stand on his own, there would be chaos. Rival families would challenge Draxon's right to rule. Military commanders might refuse to follow orders. Conquered worlds might see an opportunity to rebel. So the Emperor kept his son hidden and the rumors grew. Political enemies whispered in council chambers. They spread gossip through the imperial court. Some claimed the prince was dead. Others said he was so deformed he couldn't be shown in public. A few even suggested the Emperor had no heir at all, that it was all an elaborate lie. Lord Vexer, the Emperor's own brother, smiled whenever these rumors reached his ears. He had always believed the throne should have been his. The prince's caretakers never lasted long. The job was considered cursed. Kyler's frustration and anger had grown with each passing year, and he took it out on anyone who came near him. He threw medical equipment. He roared until the crystal walls shook. He refused treatment, refused food, refused to cooperate with anyone trying to help him. The latest caretaker, a four-armed Hectarian with decades of medical experience, had quit just 3 days ago. She told the palace overseer that the prince was impossible, that his rage made treatment pointless, that she feared for her safety. The overseer, an old Draconian named Thex who had served the imperial family for 40 years, sat in his office trying to solve an impossible problem. No Draconian would take the job anymore. The aliens who had tried were either too frightened or too incompetent. He needed someone desperate enough to accept the position, but capable enough to actually do the work. That's when he thought of the humans. Terra had been conquered only 5 years ago. It had been a short war, barely worth calling a war at all. The humans had fought bravely, but they had no chance against Draconian battle fleets. Their weapons couldn't pierce draconic scales. Their ships were slower, their technology inferior. Within 3 months, Earth's governments had surrendered. Now humans were part of the Empire, considered a minor species, useful mainly for basic labor. Thex looked through the registry of human workers who had been brought to Drakmor. Most were assigned to factories, farms, or construction projects. But one file caught his attention. Katie Mitchell, age 28, former physical therapist from a place called Colorado. She had applied for a cleaning position in the palace because it paid better than the factory work she'd been doing. A physical therapist. Someone who helped people move and function. It wasn't the same as the advanced specialists who had already failed, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the prince didn't need another doctor. Maybe he needed someone who understood that movement was something you could learn, not just something you were born with. Thex made the decision. He approved Katie's application and had her transferred to palace duty immediately. Katie Mitchell had no idea what she was walking into. When she received the notice that she'd been reassigned to the Imperial Palace, she thought she'd be mopping floors in some distant wing where tourists walked through. She put on the simple gray uniform all human workers wore, tied her brown hair back and reported for duty. Instead, two massive draconian guards, each one standing 12 feet tall in their armor, met her at the palace entrance. They didn't speak, just gestured for her to follow. They led her through corridors that grew progressively quieter and more isolated. Up staircases that seemed to go on forever. Past doors that required security clearances she didn't have. Finally, they reached a chamber at the very top of the tallest tower. Overseer Thex was waiting there. His scales were gray with age, and one of his wings had a tear in it from some long-ago battle. He looked at Katie with eyes that had seen too much. "You will care for someone important," he said in heavily accented but understandable English. "You will keep him comfortable. You will keep him calm. And you will tell absolutely no one about what you see here. Break that rule and you'll be sent back to Terra in chains. Understand?" Katie nodded, her heart pounding. The guards opened the massive door and she stepped inside. The chamber was huge, easily the size of a small house back on Earth. But it felt like a hospital room. Medical equipment lined the walls. Monitors beeped softly. The air smelled sterile and cold. And in the center of it all, sitting on a hovering throne that adjusted to his body, was Prince Kyler. He was enormous even for a draconian. His scales were deep crimson, the color of fresh blood, marking him as imperial bloodline. His wings, though limp, were massive, stretching nearly 20 feet when fully extended. His golden eyes locked onto Katie the moment she entered, and she felt the full weight of his fury. "Another one," he growled in the draconian language. The translation device in Katie's ear turned it to English a second later. "Another useless caretaker sent to pretend they can help me." Katie looked at the prince. Then she looked around the room at all the expensive equipment, the medical readouts, the hovering throne that did everything for him. She thought about all the doctors and specialists who must have come through here, all of them trying to fix him like he was a broken machine. She walked closer, ignoring the way his claws gripped the armrests of his throne. She ignored the warning growl that rumbled from his chest. And she asked the one question that none of the brilliant specialists had apparently thought to ask. "Has anyone ever just asked you what you actually want?" The roar that followed shook the crystal walls so hard that dust fell from the ceiling. Guards burst through the door, weapons ready. But Katie didn't move. She just stood there waiting for an answer. Because sometimes the most important thing wasn't fixing someone. It was listening to them first. After that first explosive meeting, Katie Mitchell did something that no other caretaker had ever done. She came back the next day. And the day after that. And the day after that. Each time, Prince Kyler expected her to treat him the way everyone else did, with that mixture of pity and clinical detachment that made him want to destroy everything in the room. But Katie was different. She completely ignored every rule of draconian protocol. The other caretakers had always addressed him with his full title, speaking in formal tones, keeping their distance as if his disability might be contagious. Katie walked right up to him on her second day and said, "Look, I'm not calling you Crown Prince Kyler every single time I need to get your attention. That's exhausting. I'm calling you Kentucky, deal with it." Kyler stared at her in shock. No one, absolutely no one, had ever spoken to him so casually. "You dare?" he began, his voice rising. "Yeah, I dare," Katie interrupted. "You're a person, not a title. And if we're going to work together, we're going to do it like normal people, not like some weird formal ceremony. Work together." That phrase hung in the air. Every other caretaker had worked on him, treating him like a problem to be solved. Katie was suggesting something entirely different. Over the following weeks, Katie did something else that confused Kyler completely. She talked to him about Earth. Not the defeated Earth that his father's fleets had conquered, but the Earth of human achievement. She told him about a mountain called Everest, nearly 6 miles high, where humans with no wings and no natural climbing abilities had forced their way to the summit using nothing but determination and primitive equipment. "We're slow," Katie said one afternoon while checking his muscle responses. "We're weak compared to most species. We can't fly, we can't breathe underwater, we don't have armor or natural weapons. But we climb mountains anyway. We cross oceans anyway. We go to space anyway. Not because we're built for it, but because we refuse to accept that we can't." She told him about a scientist named Stephen Hawking who had lost almost all ability to move, who could barely speak, but who had unraveled some of the universe's deepest mysteries using only his mind. She mentioned athletes who had lost limbs and then competed in sports anyway. She talked about explorers who had crossed frozen wastelands and burning deserts, pushing human bodies far beyond what they were designed to handle. Kyler was baffled by all of this. Humans had been conquered. They had no empire of their own, no fleets of warships, no colonies spanning multiple star systems. They were considered one of the weaker species in the galaxy. So why did this human woman act like he was the one who was missing something? Why did she talk about human achievements as if they were more impressive than the draconian empire that had defeated them? Your people were conquered by my father, Kyler said one evening, trying to understand. You lost. Why do you act so confident? Katie smiled. Losing a war doesn't mean we're weak. It just means your technology was better. But here's the thing, Kentucky. You've got all this advanced technology, all these brilliant doctors, and none of them could help you. Maybe it's time to try the human way. That evening, as the twin suns of Drakmor set through the crystalline walls, painting the room in shades of orange and purple, Katie said something that changed everything. Your doctors keep trying to fix what's broken. They look at you and see a list of things that don't work. Maybe someone should focus on what's actually possible instead. She started simple. The other caretakers had used anti-gravity harnesses that lifted Kyler and moved him around like a puppet. Katie researched human physical therapy techniques and started adapting them. The first exercises were almost embarrassingly basic. Flex this muscle. Hold for 5 seconds. Release. Repeat. Things that a draconian hatchling could do without thinking were monumental tasks for Kyler. But Katie made it interesting. She brought in music from Earth, rhythmic beats that helped time the exercises. Rock music, she called it. The draconian medical staff had never considered using sound as a training tool. Katie explained that human athletes used rhythm to improve their performance, that the brain responded to patterns. She told stories while they worked, not sad inspirational tales meant to make him feel better about his situation, but technical explanations of how human physical therapy actually worked. She talked about muscle memory, about neural pathways, about how the human body could be trained to do things it had never done before. The palace medical staff was absolutely horrified. They filed complaints with Overseer Thex, insisting that this human was using primitive, unscientific methods that would harm the prince. They demanded she be removed immediately and replaced with proper medical professionals. Thex was ready to agree. But then he checked the surveillance feeds from the prince's chamber, something he did regularly to make sure the caretakers weren't mistreating Kyler. What he saw made him pause. He immediately forwarded the footage to someone else. Emperor Draxon sat in his private study, watching the surveillance feeds from his son's tower. He had watched every caretaker over the years, hoping to see improvement, usually seeing only frustration and failure. But this human was different. She wasn't just treating Kyler's body. She was engaging his mind. For the first time in years, Kyler wasn't roaring at his caretaker. He was listening, asking questions. When Katie explained an exercise, he tried it. When she demonstrated a movement, he watched carefully and attempted to replicate it. The anger that had defined him for so long was being replaced by something the Emperor hadn't seen in his son for decades. Curiosity, engagement, hope. Emperor Draxon sent a message to Overseer Thex. The human stays. Give her whatever resources she requests. Katie introduced concepts that the Draconians, for all their advanced technology, had never considered. She explained that human babies weren't born knowing how to walk. It took them a full year or more to learn. They crawled first, then pulled themselves up, then took wobbly steps while holding onto things and finally walked on their own. It was a process, not an instinct. Every other species we know of just does it automatically, Katie explained to Kyler one day. Birds fly, fish swim, Draconians walk and fly within weeks of hatching. But humans? We have to learn. Our brains aren't pre-programmed, which means we can learn at any age. We can teach old brains new tricks. She looked directly at him, her expression serious. Your body can move, Kentucky. The problem isn't your muscles or your bones, not entirely. The problem is your brain never learned how to control them. All those doctors were trying to fix your body. Nobody was trying to teach your brain. That was the breakthrough moment. Katie started treating Kyler's condition not as a physical disability, but as a learning problem. She introduced developmental exercises, the same ones human children used. Crawling movements to teach the brain about coordinated motion. Balance exercises to develop spatial awareness. Repetitive movements to build neural pathways. She brought in adaptive equipment, Simple things that the advanced draconian technology had overlooked. Parallel bars to hold onto while practicing standing. Resistance bands to strengthen specific muscle groups. Even a simple rubber ball that Kyler could squeeze to build grip strength. The prince's withered muscles started responding. After 2 months he could flex his legs in ways he never had before. After 3 months he could grip objects with his claws without shaking. His wings, which had hung limp for 20 years, began to move slightly when he concentrated. But the most important change wasn't physical. Kyler began to believe. For the first time in his life he looked at his body not as a prison, but as something that could be trained. Katie had given him something no draconian doctor ever had. She had given him human stubbornness, the bone-deep belief that limitations were just problems waiting to be solved. And in the highest tower of the Crystal Palace, a prince who had never walked began to dream of the day he might fly. 4 months into Katie's work with Prince Kyler, something happened that shouldn't have been possible. It was a regular morning session, and they were working on standing exercises like they had been for weeks. Kyler was supported by the parallel bars Katie had installed, his claws gripping the metal so hard it bent slightly under the pressure. His legs shook with effort, muscles that had never properly worked straining against 20 years of atrophy. "Hold it," Katie encouraged, watching his form carefully. 5 more seconds. "You've got this." Kyler's breathing was heavy, his golden eyes locked forward with intense concentration. The shaking in his legs got worse. Katie prepared to help him back down to his resting position like she had done hundreds of times before. Then Kyler let go of the bars. For 12 full seconds, Crown Prince Kyler stood completely on his own. No support. No harnesses. No anti-gravity technology. Just his own 2 legs holding up his massive body. Katie's eyes went wide. Kyler looked down at his legs as if seeing them for the first time, wonder and disbelief washing over his face. Then his legs gave out. Katie had prepared for this moment. Over the past month, she'd been building something in secret during her off hours, using equipment she'd borrowed from the palace maintenance department. It was an exoskeleton brace, based on human prosthetic principles but scaled up massively for Kyler's size. She'd combined draconian materials with human engineering concepts, creating something that neither species had thought to make. She triggered the brace as Kyler fell. It caught him, supporting his weight and lowering him gently to the padded floor instead of letting him crash. Kyler lay there, breathing hard, but his eyes were blazing with something Katie had never seen before. Pure triumph. "I stood," he said, his voice filled with awe. "I actually stood." "Yeah," Katie said, grinning so wide her face hurt. "Yeah, you did." Within an hour the entire palace knew. The medical staff burst into the tower, demanding to see the readings, to understand what had happened. How could a prince they declared permanently disabled suddenly stand? It wasn't possible. Their science said it wasn't possible. Overseer Thex arrived shortly after, his face grave. He pulled Katie aside while the doctors swarmed around Kyler, running their scans and tests. "You need to leave," Thex said quietly. "Today. I'm having you reassigned." Katie stared at him in shock. What? He just stood. He actually stood. "You're giving him false hope," Thex said, and he actually sounded sad about it. He stood for 12 seconds. That's not walking. That's certainly not flying. When he fails at the real challenges ahead, when he realizes he got so close but can't actually achieve what he needs, it will destroy him. It would be kinder to let him accept his limitations now. Katie felt anger rise in her chest. False hope? He just did something your doctor said was impossible. And you want to stop now? The medical staff agrees with me. This needs to end before. No. The roar came from Kyler. He had pushed away the doctors and their scanning equipment. He pulled himself up using the parallel bars, his legs shaking but holding. Every eye in the room turned to him. "The human stays," Kyler commanded, his voice carrying the full authority of his royal bloodline. "That is my order." "What? Does anyone here dare disobey the crown prince?" Silence filled the chamber. Overseer Thex looked at Kyler for a long moment, then slowly bowed his head. "As you command, your highness." It was the first time in Kyler's entire life that he had given an order that was actually obeyed. Katie saw something change in him in that moment. He wasn't just a patient anymore. He was becoming a prince. After that day, the training intensified dramatically. Katie pushed Kyler harder than she ever had before. She made him work through pain, through exhaustion, through the voice in his head that whispered he would fail. She understood something important. The biggest barriers weren't physical. They were psychological. 20 years of being told his body didn't work had built walls in his mind that were harder to break than any muscle limitation. She made the Crown Prince do things that would have been humiliating if anyone outside that tower knew about them. She had him crawl across the floor like a draconian hatchling, retraining his brain to understand coordinated movement. She made him practice balance exercises that toddlers could do, standing on one leg for as long as possible, walking in straight lines, turning without falling. There were days when Kyler wanted to quit. Days when the exercises seemed pointless, when his progress felt too slow, when the gap between where he was and where he needed to be seemed impossible to cross. "I'm never going to fly," he said one evening, exhausted and frustrated after a particularly difficult session. "Even if I learn to walk, my wings are too weak. I'll never be a real draconian." Katie sat down beside him, something that would have shocked the imperial court. A human sitting casually next to the Crown Prince like they were equals. "You know what makes someone real?" Katie asked. "It's not what they can do naturally. It's what they refuse to give up on. You're more real than any draconian I've met, Kentucky. Because you're fighting for every single thing you achieve." But Katie knew attitude alone wouldn't be enough. The prince's wings were responding to the targeted electrical stimulation she'd been using, a technique borrowed from human nerve damage treatment. But they were still weak, the muscles underdeveloped from decades of disuse. They needed a different approach. Then Katie had an idea that the draconian medical staff found absolutely bizarre. She showed up one morning with something she'd built in the palace workshop. It looked like a chair with wheels, but it wasn't a hovering throne like the one Kyler had used for years. This was powered entirely by the user's own arms. "What is that?" Kyler asked, staring at the contraption. "It's called a wheelchair," Katie explained. "Humans use them. You push the wheels with your arms and it moves you around." Kyler's expression darkened. "You want me to wheel myself around like crippled prey? To use my arms because my legs don't work?" Katie met his glare without flinching. "I want you mobile on your own terms. Your hovering throne moves you around but you don't control it. This is all you. Your power. Your choice of where to go. Walking comes next. Flying comes after that. But independence? That comes right now." Kyler looked at the wheelchair for a long moment. Then, slowly he lowered himself into it. The seat was custom-built for his body, reinforced to handle his weight. He gripped the wheels experimentally, then pushed. The chair rolled forward. Kyler pushed again, harder this time. The chair picked up speed. He turned, learning the motion, then pushed harder still. Within minutes he was racing around the large chamber, testing the limits of how fast he could go, how sharply he could turn. And then something happened that no one in the palace had heard in 20 years. Kyler laughed. Not a bitter laugh or a sarcastic one. A real, genuine, joyful laugh. He raced around the room, bellowing with laughter, the sound echoing off the crystal walls and carrying through the palace corridors. Guards stopped in confusion. Servants looked up in wonder. Emperor Draxon, in his study several floors below, heard his son's laughter for the first time in decades and felt something break inside his chest. By nightfall, Kyler had explored every corner of his chamber under his own power. He was exhausted, his arms burning from the unfamiliar exercise, but he was grinning. "Tomorrow," Katie said as she prepared to leave for the evening, "we add arm weights to build up strength. Because those arms are going to power your wings too." The next 6 months were a blur of progress. Kyler started walking short distances without support. First 5 steps, then 10, then 20. His balance improved dramatically. His legs, though still weaker than a normal draconian's, could hold his weight for extended periods. His wings were the bigger challenge. Katie worked with him daily on wing exercises, building up the muscles slowly, extending them fully, folding them, learning to feel the air resistance against the membranes. Kyler couldn't fly yet, but for the first time, his wings moved when he wanted them to. Katie documented everything meticulously. Every measurement, every improvement, every setback. She knew what was coming even if Kyler didn't want to think about it yet. Eventually the prince would need to prove himself to the Empire. And when that day came, walking wouldn't be enough. He would need to fly. The secret couldn't last forever. Despite all the security measures, despite the Emperor's best efforts to keep his son's condition hidden, word eventually leaked beyond the palace walls. A servant talked to a family member. A guard mentioned something to a friend. Rumors spread like wildfire through the capital city of Drakmor, then jumped from planet to planet across the Empire's quantum communication network. The Crown Prince could walk now. A human had helped him do it. But could he fly? Lord Vexor, Emperor Draxon's younger brother, heard these rumors with great interest. Vexor had always believed he should have been emperor. He was a powerful warrior, a brilliant strategist, and his wings could carry him faster than almost any Draconian alive. When his older brother had taken the throne 30 years ago, Vexor had accepted it with barely concealed resentment. But he had waited, planned, gathered supporters. And now he saw his opportunity. Vexor called for a session of the imperial court, invoking his right as a member of the royal family. Hundreds of high-ranking Draconians gathered in the Grand Hall, along with representatives from dozens of conquered species. The chamber was massive, with a ceiling that stretched hundreds of feet high, designed so Draconians could fly during proceedings. Emperor Draxon sat on his throne, knowing what was coming but powerless to stop it. Lord Vexor stepped forward, his crimson and gold scales gleaming under the crystal lights. His voice carried across the chamber with practiced authority. I invoke the ancient law of succession, written by our ancestors 1,000 years ago. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Any heir to the imperial throne must prove their capability before their 21st cycle. They must demonstrate flight across the traditional testing ground, showing they possess the strength to lead our people. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Everyone knew what this meant. Everyone knew about the rumors. Crown Prince Kyler has never been seen in public, Vexor continued, his tone dripping with false concern. There are whispers that he cannot fly. If these rumors are true, then according to our ancient laws, he is unfit to inherit. The throne would pass to the next qualified heir. He didn't need to say who that would be. Everyone knew. Emperor Draxon's claws dug into the armrests of his throne, leaving deep gouges in the metal. But he was trapped. The ancient law was sacred, carved into the foundation stones of Draconian culture. Even an emperor couldn't simply ignore it. His advisors had warned him this day would come. He'd hoped to have more time. When is my son's 21st cycle? Draxon asked, though he already knew the answer. 10 weeks from today, Your Majesty, Vexor said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. 10 weeks. Kyler had been walking for less than 3 months. He'd only achieved brief, unstable flight a handful of times. 10 weeks wasn't enough time. But Draxon had no choice. The trial will proceed as law demands, the Emperor declared. 10 weeks from today, Crown Prince Kyler will cross the Crimson Canyon. The Empire will witness his flight. The court erupted in conversation. Some nobles looked excited at the drama to come. Others appeared concerned. A few of Vexor's supporters smiled openly, already anticipating victory. That evening, Emperor Draxon did something unprecedented. He summoned Katie Mitchell to his throne room. No human had stood in that chamber since the day Terra's leaders had signed the surrender documents 5 years ago. Guards escorted Katie through corridors filled with staring Draconians, past murals depicting their species' greatest victories, and finally into the throne room itself. The Emperor sat alone on his throne, and without all the court members present, Katie could see how tired he looked. How worried. Can you make my son fly? Draxon asked. His voice rumbled like an avalanche, deep and powerful, but Katie heard the fear underneath. Katie looked up at the massive Emperor, this being who commanded 1,000 star systems, whose fleets had conquered her home world. She thought about Kai in his tower, working himself to exhaustion every single day, pushing through pain that would make most people quit. She thought about how far he'd come and how far he still had to go. She answered honestly. I don't know. But he's going to try. And that's more than anyone else ever gave him the chance to do. Something changed in Emperor Draxon's eyes. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was just desperation. Then you will have every resource this empire possesses, he said. Scientists, engineers, equipment, whatever you need. Fail and my son loses his birthright. Succeed. The Emperor paused, considering his next words carefully. Succeed, and perhaps humans are worth more than we believed. Katie bowed, not out of subservience, but out of respect for a father who was terrified for his son. We'll need access to Terra's engineering databases, she said. And I need to talk to some people back home. Done, Draxon said immediately. Whatever you require. The next 10 weeks became the most intense period of Kyler's life. Katie completely restructured their training schedule. They worked 16 hours a day, every day with no breaks. Katie brought in everything she could think of from human knowledge. Sports science data about building muscle efficiently. Aviation engineering principles about lift and drag. Information about how human pilots train for endurance. She established a quantum communication link with engineers back on Terra, humans who specialized in flight dynamics and aerospace design. They'd never worked with a living, biological flyer before, but they threw themselves into the problem with typical human enthusiasm. Calculations filled Katie's data pad. Simulations ran constantly. They analyzed every aspect of Kyler's wing structure, his muscle density, his body weight distribution. The palace became divided. Some staff members cheered for Kyler's success, inspired by his determination. They whispered encouragement when they passed the tower. Others had already pledged their loyalty to Lord Vexer, certain the prince would fail. The tension grew daily. Kyler pushed himself beyond anything Katie had asked before. His wings grew stronger, the muscles developing in ways the doctors hadn't thought possible. He practiced flight in the tower's high chamber, managing longer and longer sessions before exhaustion forced him down. 3 weeks before the trial, Kyler achieved something remarkable. He flew for 45 seconds straight, circling the chamber twice before his wings gave out. He crashed into the safety padding Katie had installed everywhere, then roared in frustration so loud the entire palace heard it. Katie ran over to where he lay in the padding. That was amazing. Did you feel how stable you were on the second circle? Your wing beats were getting more efficient. It's not enough. Kyler shouted, slamming his fist into the padding. The trial requires crossing the Crimson Canyon. Do you know how long that takes? 20 minutes minimum, even for strong flyers. Some take 30. I can barely manage 45 seconds. Katie sat down beside him, her expression serious. Then we don't train you to fly for 20 minutes, she said. We train you to fly for 40. We train until 20 minutes seems easy by comparison. But Katie knew raw strength and endurance wouldn't be enough. The Crimson Canyon was legendary among Draconians, a test of flying skill that challenged even experienced warriors. Kyler needed every advantage she could give him. She spent her evenings in the palace workshop, working on her final innovation. Using lightweight carbon fiber materials, the strongest substance humans had developed, she created nearly invisible supports. These could be woven directly into Kyler's wing membranes, providing structural reinforcement without adding significant weight. They would help distribute stress across the wing, preventing the kind of muscle failure that had been limiting his flight time. When she showed them to Kyler, he hesitated. Isn't this cheating? If they discover I'm using technology to fly. It's not cheating, Katie interrupted firmly. It's augmentation. Humans have been using tools to overcome our limitations for thousands of years. Glasses to help us see. Prosthetics to help us walk. Every species uses technology. That's what separates intelligent life from animals. These supports don't fly for you. They just help your wings work more efficiently. You're still doing all the work. Kyler looked at the delicate carbon fiber structures. Will the Empire accept this? Katie smiled. Every Draconian warrior wears armor. Is that cheating? They use weapons. Is that cheating? Tools are what make us all successful, Kentucky. Even dragons. As the trial date approached, Kyler trained with the supports integrated into his wings. The difference was remarkable. His flight time doubled, then tripled. The supports didn't make him fly, but they made his natural efforts go further. 10 weeks had seemed like a long time when the challenge was first issued. Now, with only days remaining, it felt like they'd barely had any time at all. Katie watched Kyler practice and hoped desperately that it would be enough. Because if it wasn't, she wasn't sure what would break first, Kyler's body or his spirit. The morning of the trial arrived with the kind of perfect weather that felt almost mocking. Clear skies stretched endlessly above Drakmor, and the twin suns blazed with intense light. Across the Draconian Empire, spanning 1,000 star systems, billions of beings tuned into holographic broadcast. This wasn't just a test of one prince's ability to fly. This was a spectacle that would determine the future of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. The Crimson Canyon was legendary. It stretched across Drakmor's equator like a massive scar on the planet's surface, nearly 200 miles long and 5 miles deep. At the bottom, volcanic vents pumped superheated air upward, creating brutal updrafts that could slam a flyer into the canyon walls. Crosscurrents appeared without warning, invisible air rivers that could flip even experienced Draconians upside down. The wind screamed through the canyon like a living thing, hostile and unpredictable. Only the strongest, most skilled Draconian flyers ever attempted to cross it. It was used as a rite of passage for elite warriors, a proving ground where overconfidence could be fatal. The minimum time to cross was usually around 20 minutes for a very strong flyer. Most took closer to 30. Some never made it across at all. And Prince Kyler, who had only learned to fly a few weeks ago, had to cross it in front of half the empire. The crowds gathered at the canyon's edge were enormous. Thousands of Draconians filled viewing platforms that had been hastily constructed for the event. Representatives from dozens of conquered species attended, including a small group of humans from Terra who had been granted permission to travel to Drakmor to witness the trial. News drones hovered everywhere, capturing every angle. Then the palace doors opened and Prince Kyler emerged. For the first time in his entire life, the Crown Prince appeared in public. He walked down the crystal steps of the palace on his own two legs. No hovering throne. No attendants supporting him. Just Kyler, moving with careful but determined steps, his crimson scales gleaming in the sunlight. The crowd's reaction was immediate and deafening. Gasps of shock rippled through thousands of observers. The rumors had been true. The prince could walk. But walking and flying were vastly different things. The murmuring grew louder as Kyler approached the canyon's edge, speculation and doubt mixing with genuine hope. Lord Vexer stood on the opposite side of the canyon, his position already established. His wings were spread in a magnificent display, each membrane perfectly formed and powerful. He looked every bit the warrior prince, confident and strong. When he saw Kyler walking toward the starting point, Vexer smiled. It was the smile of someone who had already won. Katie Mitchell walked beside Kyler, carrying a small equipment bag. Guards had tried to stop her, insisting that only the prince could approach the trial area, but Emperor Draxon himself had overruled them. The human had gotten his son this far. She would be there until the very last moment. They reached the designated starting point, a flat platform of stone that jutted out over the canyon's edge. Katie knelt down and began making final checks on the carbon fiber supports woven into Kyler's wing membranes. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, testing each connection point, making sure everything was secure. "Remember your breathing patterns," Katie whispered, quiet enough that only Kyler could hear. "Deep and steady. Don't let the adrenaline make you hyperventilate. You've done this 100 times in practice."